She's gonna divorce me. I'll lose everything.
Steve McFadden stars in Murder in Mind, Sunday at 9 on BBC One.
I didn't do it.
Dome Minister Charles Faulkner, his scourge Tory Peter Ainsworth, Paralympic athlete Tanni Gray-Thompson, sleaze-busting MP Martin Bell, and columnist Simon Heffer on Question Time in Manchester 35 minutes from now on BBC One after the news.
This is BBC One in the North. Now the news at 10 o'clock with George Alagaya and Ian White.
Tony Blair's launched a baby bond scheme in time for the election. Hundreds of pounds to save for the future and a stake in the community. A change in slaughter policy just happens to save Phoenix the calf. The 15 new People's Peers turn out to be everything except ordinary. And the long-haired rocker the Japanese hope will lead them out of a decade of recession.
And here in the north, a lorry driver admits he was to blame for an horrific crash which killed 6 people. And how this man's life was saved by a quick-thinking paramedic who turned an ambulance into an operating theatre.
Good evening. The government's planning to give every newborn baby in the country between £400 and £800 to be saved until they're adults. The so-called baby bond is part of a package of proposals Tony Blair says will help reduce poverty and encourage saving. The Tories have called the plans an election con. Our social affairs editor Neil Dixon reports.
A birthday present for every baby in Britain. That's what the government promised today. A trust fund to be invested at least until they're 18, giving the next generation a financial foundation on which to build. Unsurprisingly, it got the maternal seal of approval.
I think it's a good idea. Obviously you don't get the benefit of it immediately, but it does sort of focus your mind on saving for the future.
This is one of New Labour's big ideas for the election. Flanked by 3 cabinet colleagues, the Prime Minister said he wanted every child given the chance to make the most of themselves.
It's going to encourage people to save, encourage people to plan for their financial future, and encourage people to be responsible members of society.
But will this windfall be enough to change the life chances of the next generation? Under the scheme, £500 would be invested for babies from low-income families. The better off would get half that amount. Poorer children would also get £100 top-up every 5 years, giving them £800 in total. By the time they're 18, that would produce around £1,600 invested in a building society, perhaps as much as £2,700 if invested in stocks and shares.
It's not going to be enough to help them onto the housing ladder, except maybe with a rental deposit. It's not going to be enough as a deposit to buy a property, and certainly not in 18 years' time.
But families would also be able to chip in, and the government is promising extra incentives to encourage those on low incomes to save. Critics, though, claim many simply can't afford to put anything by, and the opposition parties are unimpressed.
Where did the money come from in the first place? It came from the poorest members of society who have paid a huge amount of extra tax under this government.
I do think that quite a lot of people will be a bit cynical that this rabbit is pulled out of the hat weeks before a likely general election.
And in any case, would 18-year-olds handle their newfound wealth responsibly? The government hasn't decided whether they'd be free to spend the money from the trust funds as they wished, or if it should be restricted to worthy endeavours like education or buying a house. So what would today's young do with a couple of £1,000?
Buy lots of clothes, take myself on a nice holiday, buy my boyfriend a season ticket for Tottenham.
Invest some of it and probably spend about 500 or so pounds on just clothes and my car.
If New Labour believes in anything, it believes in combining rights and responsibilities. Now, this scheme may look like an electoral gimmick, but it is an attempt to redefine the relationship between the individual and the state, to give young people a stake in society. Whether it'll work or not is another matter, and we won't know that for at least another 18 years. Neil Dixon, BBC News, Maidenhead in Berkshire.
Our political editor Andrew Marr is in Westminster. Andrew, how radical is this in terms of recasting socialism in a way in which right-wing Americans approve?
Well, certainly in America, people on the right and the left applaud this kind of thing. On the right, they say, because it helps divide people from the state. It gives them a stake of their own. And there's certainly people around government talking tonight about this is not the end of the welfare state or anything like that, but nonetheless it gives people a little more independence from the state. While for the left, it's the answer, or it may be part of the answer, to the old conundrum of how do you redistribute, how do you take tax from the richer people and give them to the poor and still get re-elected. This way, you're not bribing voters because these people haven't been born yet. They're not going to be voters for another 18 years. But you are taking money from taxpayers today and you are handing it to families who might not have a chance otherwise to share in the kind of property-owning democracy that the rest of us enjoy.
Nonetheless, have the Tories got a point when they say that they are bribing people with their own money just before the election?
Well, absolutely. In the end, what's going on here? Money has come from taxpayers who've earned it themselves and can spend it in any way they want, and it's going through government and coming back the other side, particularly to poorer families, but they're going to be told how they can spend it and how they can't spend it. There's going to be strings attached, which is why the Conservative Party in particular is saying, listen, it's very, very simple. The alternative to this is just to let people have more of their own money and spend it as they wish and not as Gordon Brown or Tony Blair or other well-meaning ministers want them to spend it.
Andrew, thanks a lot. The Prime Minister has denied that he personally changed the government's foot-and-mouth slaughter programme in order to save a single white calf called Phoenix. Today it was announced that cattle near infected farms would no longer be culled automatically. Local vets will decide if it's necessary. The government says the change was possible because the disease is now under control. Others claim that Downing Street intervened to avert a public relations disaster.
Phoenix has risen from the ashes not once but twice. First, she miraculously survived a cull on this farm. Then, with a slaughter squad poised to come back and kill her, she got a last-minute reprieve from Downing Street.
It's just a ray of sunshine for the rest of the farmers, you know. Everything's been so depressing and miserable. I think we need something to cheer us all up a little bit.
So there's unbridled joy here in Membury today. Phoenix the calf, it seems, has touched the hearts of the nation and the hearts of Downing Street too. It's hard to believe, but this little calf may have changed government policy. But while Tony Blair's popular with Phoenix's owners, he was not so popular with these demonstrators today in Cumbria, where foot and mouth has been worst. And the Prime Minister was asked repeatedly if one animal has made him change his strategy.
Can I just ask you, the culling policy wasn't then changed to save Phoenix the calf then?
No. If we hadn't taken the very, very hard and tough action, difficult, and it's a ghastly business having to do this, but if we hadn't done it right at the very beginning, there's no way the disease would be under control now.
Okay, thank you. On the question of...
But in the Commons, opposition MPs were furious when the Agriculture Minister Nick Brown came to tell them of the switch in slaughter policy the day after Downing Street had told the media.
Since this change of policy was announced by number 10 Downing Street just in time for the 10 o'clock news last night, can the Minister tell us when the decision was actually made?
Back in Devon, this family just down the road from Phoenix wants some answers too. Their livestock were all slaughtered a few days ago. Under the government's new policy, they might well have been spared.
I just couldn't get over it, you know. I tried to get out of it, but there was no way that...
It's not surprising farmers shed tears when the carcasses of dead cattle litter villages like Membury. They say the policy of automatic slaughter has been far too indiscriminate.
It was a very blunt and brutal instrument, which has resulted in the needless slaughter of thousands and thousands of healthy cattle. OK, the disease has been brought under control, and the contiguous cull has played an important part in that, but at a very, very high price.
As for Phoenix, it seems Downing Street wanted to use her as a good news story amid the misery of foot and mouth, but they've ended up being accused of cynical media manipulation. Ben Brown, BBC News, Devon.
Richard Bilton is at the Ministry of Agriculture. For all those denials we heard, did one animal actually change government policy?
Well, it did in as much as it brought forward an announcement about government policy. The reports we have is that by last night, number 10 were fed up of the headlines surrounding Phoenix, given that there was to be a change in policy. So they contacted the media and said, look, this policy on the slaughter of cattle is to be changed and Phoenix is to be saved. That was done so quickly that this morning the Minister of Agriculture, Nick Brown, arrived here and he didn't even know that that had gone ahead. So in that respect it did, but on another level, you know, this is a policy that takes time to build. It takes time to build the framework and to consult. It is relatively popular amongst the farming community, so I think it's a policy that's taken days to build, but was brought hurriedly forward as a result of Phoenix and the headlines.
Even so, how worried are the experts that this might be relaxing the measures against foot and mouth too quickly?
Well, there's always been the potential for movement surrounding cattle because they show the symptoms so quickly. And you know, there have been some in the farming community that have said that they should never have been involved in the sort of near-farm cull. So from that point of view, it has been welcome. And because cases are falling away, there are now more vets to go and check these cases. But slaughter is still at the heart of the government's policy, and sheep and pigs are the main worry. Now, we have fewer cases, but there are cases still appearing, and they will for a while. So any cases in sheep and pigs will still be stamped down on. So from that point of view, things haven't really changed. If there was a change in those areas, then there'd be very real concern. But frankly, I don't think that will happen.
Richard Bilton, thanks very much. Shares in BT fell sharply today following news that its chairman, Sir Ian Vallance, is standing down and being replaced by Sir Christopher Bland, the current chairman of the BBC. BT's management has been under growing pressure, with the company's debts rising to almost £30 billion.
It's an ailing giant in an industry which is facing a crisis of confidence. BT is laden with debt and has been under siege from investors demanding change at the top. Now it's getting a new leader from the world of broadcasting.
My job is to carry on, to develop the company, and I bring a fresh and outside perspective and experience of a wide range of industries and businesses, and of course of the media and the BBC.
But Sir Christopher's new job, which brings with it a salary of £500,000, is in an industry where he has no experience. He'll stay on at the BBC until a successor is appointed, probably in the summer. With a general election looming, that's caused some concern.
During the next 6 weeks, the BBC are going to be under enormous pressure from all the political parties. And this is a time when the chairman should be there full-time and not be diverted by other duties in a second job.
After 14 years in charge at BT, Sir Ian Vallance has been blamed by investors for a failure to carve out a clear strategy. With the shares suffering, he and his chief executive, Sir Peter Bonfield, both faced calls to go. But Sir Ian, travelling on business, said he'd wanted to depart.
The real problem has been finding the right kind of chairman to take on the job. And now I'm delighted that we've got the right man in Sir Christopher Bland.
BT's recent history is one of falling shares and rising debts. 16 months ago, the shares climbed above £15, but tonight they closed at £5.49 after another 5% fall today. In 2 years, the company's debts have risen from under £1 billion to almost £30 billion. Paying governments across Europe huge sums for the new mobile phone licenses now looks a costly error, although others made the same mistake. Radical moves like a break-up of the business could now be on the cards. The city will want the new chairman to think the unthinkable. In the end, BT had little choice but to do what the city wanted and make a change at the top. But now the new man will be under pressure to prove that this embattled company can reduce its debt at a time of turbulence throughout its industry. Rory Catherine-Jones, BBC News at BT headquarters.
The first so-called People's Peers have been named and immediately criticised for being far too elitist. It was thought the list would be made up of ordinary members of the public, but the 15 prospective new members of the House of Lords include 7 knights and 3 professors.
The familiar image of a British peer was supposed to change. According to the advanced publicity, the great and the good of the Lords were to be joined by so-called People's Peers, appointed by a new independent commission. But now it seems establishment figures like these will be joined by more of the same. This new member's closest to the exception, a homelessness charity leader who accepts that he stands out from the establishment crowd.
I work for a living, so I'm not a career politician. You've got 2 choices in life. You can complain, or you can use what structures there are to do something about it, and I've decided to use what structures there are to do something about it.
But other new peers on the list don't fit many people's idea of ordinary people. The 15 names include 7 Knights of the Realm, 3 professors and a lady. Between them, they hold 3 OBEs, an MBE and 4 CBEs. The Commission is defending its choices.
A lot of them come from very humble, ordinary backgrounds.
I can't think of a single one whom I regard as having airs and graces. Now, one gets muddled up in semantics and newspaper glib headlines. We have gone for people who've really done things in their lives.
Today, that argument's been mocked. The new peers came from the conventional mould.
People who I'm sure will make a valuable contribution, but who would otherwise have been quite obvious candidates for the normal procedures. I wonder if the Honourable Lady could tell us what exactly the government's definition of the people is these days.
The character of the Lords won't change in a hurry. Today, the chairman of the Appointments Commission was asked why there were no ordinary people on the list, hairdressers say. He said his commission would have to be sure that people like that, as he put it, would be comfortable in the Lords. It wasn't what was expected when the government encouraged people to believe that the new system would make the Lords more representative of the people outside. John Pienaar, BBC News, Westminster.
The Olympic triple jumper Asha Hansen has told a court about the night her former boyfriend was injured in what he claimed was a racist attack. Chris Cotter is accused with two other men of faking the assault and sending abusive mail to other black athletes to make it seem more convincing. Ms. Hansen said the incident badly disrupted her preparations for the Sydney Games last year. GlaxoSmithKline, the makers of the anti-smoking drug Zyban, are to issue doctors with a warning about mixing the drug with other medication. The warning comes after a coroner recorded a verdict of death by natural causes on Kerry Weston, a 21-year-old flight attendant who'd been prescribed Zyban and was using it while taking anti-malarial pills. Scotland's football captain Colin Hendry has been given a 6-match ban and a £4,000 fine by the sport's governing body, FIFA. He elbowed an opponent in the throat during Scotland's World Cup qualifier with San Marino last month. Hendry's international future is now in doubt. The Conservative leader William Hague has challenged Labour's claim to have been prudent in its running of the economy. He said the Chancellor Gordon Brown had left the country in a bad state to cope with a worldwide economic downturn.
For these workers in Northampton, it's already clear that an economic downturn can have crushing consequences. Almost 1,000 of them were told today that they will lose their jobs when the factory closes next year. William Hague says that high taxes and the red tape imposed by this government have made it harder for companies to cope.
We're in bad shape to hold our own in an economic downturn. Rather than plotting a course for stability, Gordon Brown is following an imprudent path in an uncertain world.
Mr. Hague said the Chancellor had talked the language of prudence, but he accused him of presiding over the biggest rise in tax in any peacetime parliament and having an appetite for public spending which knows no bounds.
We had to deal with an Asian crisis, then a Russian crisis. We've got now a slowdown in America. Japan is barely growing at all. But I think the Governor of the Bank of England put it right yesterday when he said, because of the tough decisions we've taken, we are better placed than we would have been in the past to deal with these circumstances as they arise.
And ministers believe memories of the last recession under the Conservatives are stronger than any fears of a future one under them. There's nothing ministers would like more than to fight the election on the economy. It's what matters most to voters, and they're proud of their record. But William Hague has to score points on this key issue, or there'll be little point in fighting on any other front. Gita Hari, BBC News, Conservative Central Office.
18 people have died in Turkey and many others are near death in a mass hunger strike over prison conditions. Most of the 800 hunger strikers are left-wing extremists convicted of terrorist offences, but relatives of the inmates are also refusing food in their homes. From Istanbul, Brian Barron reports.
In one of Istanbul's poorest quarters, graffiti of the banned revolutionary movement. In this home, a shrine to political martyrdom. It's a house of death. After 156 days on hunger strike, Zehra Kulaxis, 22, is fading.
I believe that we will win. That is why I will fast until the end. But I don't know if I'll be alive. Maybe, maybe not.
She's comforted by her father. Her uncle is on hunger strike in prison. The empty bed belongs to Zehra's 19-year-old sister. Her hunger strike ended in death last week. That funeral brought out revolutionaries whose movement admits responsibility for assassinations and terrorism. Over 700 of their comrades are on hunger strike in jail. So far, 14 prisoners have died and 4 relatives outside. This crisis is over prison reform, vital if Turkey is to join the European Union. Last year, Turkish security forces targeted jails where communist inmates had imposed their own discipline and amassed weapons. 30 died. The strategy was to move the militants into these new isolation jails to destroy their defiance. The hunger strike's their response. Turkey's former hardline justice minister, who designed the new isolation jails, says the present government lacks grip.
I'm sorry about these hunger strike deaths, but there's another side to this tragedy. Terrorist groups are ordering their followers to sacrifice themselves in an attempt to regain control inside our prisons.
At Turkada isolation jail, relatives line up to visit hunger strikers. It's a confrontation fueled by a lethal stubbornness on all sides. Horrific, harrowing, such words don't do justice to this gut-wrenching crisis. The tempo of death is rising, so is criticism of the government. Scores of would-be martyrs are in the terminal stages of life. Brian Barron, BBC News, outside Terkada prison, Turkey.
Here, animal rights activists are to be targeted by a specially formed police unit, in what the Home Secretary Jack Straw said was a move against the increasingly violent tactics used by some campaigners. Today, Mr. Straw visited the drug testing firm Huntington Life Sciences, where staff have been repeatedly attacked and harassed.
In a decisive show of solidarity, Jack Straw braved protesters to see for himself the laboratories at the heart of the controversy. Here, animals are used to test drugs before they can be given to people to fight life-threatening diseases.
We're committed to the pharmaceutical industry, to this kind of institution. Above all, we're committed to allowing decent, law-abiding people to go about their lives without being threatened by criminal terrorists.
Staff have had their cars burned out by extremists bent on stopping the experiments. The managing director was attacked with a baseball bat and needed stitches. HSBC is one of several city institutions no longer allowing customers to hold shares in Huntington Life.
Our staff were being intimidated, our staff were being threatened, and we decided that in the circumstances, no relationship with Huntington Life Science, our staff being threatened, that we would support our staff, and that's why we did what we did.
Protesters have scared some in the city, but not the government. Jack Straw announced new measures to target extremists, as peaceful demonstrators from the Stop Huntington Animal Cruelty campaign said their fight would continue.
We are 100% dedicated, as thousands are around this country, to close this place and every other place like it. But this is our main target for now.
Labour could have stayed out of this debate. Instead, it's come down very strongly against the views of the animal rights protesters and in favour of the research done here and the workers here, hence today's visit. Margaret Gilmore, BBC News, Huntingdon.
Japan has a new prime minister, described as the weirdo by one cabinet colleague. Flamboyant Junichiro Koizumi, with his long hair and love of rock music, was elected by supporters desperate for change after years of economic and political stagnation. He's promised them a program of radical reform.
The emperor on the left. He's swearing in Japan's 11th prime minister in 11 years. A familiar ritual, but something is different. A week ago, Junichiro Koizumi was a maverick in Japan's ruling party. Tonight, the man with the flamboyant hairdo is running the world's second largest economy. Despite the courtly etiquette, it's a political earthquake. We went to the new Prime Minister's constituency on the outskirts of Tokyo to see the celebrations. It wasn't a general election that brought their man to power, but an internal vote in the party that has ruled Japan since the war. The rank and file rebelled against the old party bosses and elected someone more in tune with modern Japan. This, believe it or not, is the new Prime Minister's favorite band. A few years ago, their lead singer died. It was Mr. Koizumi who opened a museum to commemorate him. His unorthodox tastes have endeared him to Japan's disaffected youth, fed up with swatting for a career. I hope he ends all this political corruption, Sato told me. We need change. But change also means pain, here amongst Japan's newly destitute. Mr. Koizumi has said he's prepared to see bankrupt companies fold and unemployment rise even further.
Koizumi's message is
there's no gain without pain. I'm the person to bring about the gain. Now bear with me and endure some of the pain. That's the message. It's a brand new message.
Brand new also some of those in the cabinet. The outspoken and popular Makiko Tanaka becomes Japan's first woman foreign minister. The winds of change are in the air. After years of paralysis, Japan tonight finally has a government that says it will embrace radical reform. It's a case of good intentions, but unfortunate timing, because there's a growing fear amongst Western governments that the last thing the tottering world economy needs right now is a full-blown Japanese recession. Matt Fry, BBC News, Tokyo.
OK, it's 10:25. I'll be back a little later with an update on the day's headlines. But now we join our news teams across the UK.
Good evening and welcome to Look North. I'm Ian White. A lorry driver has admitted that his dangerous driving killed 6 people in an horrific accident on a busy motorway. Brian France from Barnsley was responsible for one of the worst road crashes ever seen in North Yorkshire. He's been warned he faces a long jail sentence. John Cundy reports.
Firefighters called to the A1M last November said they'd never seen a crash scene like it. 4 vehicles were involved, and 3 of the victims who died had only stopped to help the occupants of a car which had already crashed. Brian France, who's 54 and was driving the Sainsbury's delivery vehicle, suffered only minor injuries. He appeared in court in Leeds today.
Relatives of the accident victims were in tears in court as they heard Brian France admit causing the deaths of the 6 by dangerous driving. Releasing France on bail until June, Judge Paul Hoffman warned him he must prepare for a substantial prison sentence. And as a condition of bail meanwhile, he told France he must not drive.
Relatives of the victims were preparing to return to court on June the 4th, when France will be sentenced after reports. A car was waiting to collect France at the back of the court, and he was driven quickly away without making any comment.
A quick-thinking paramedic was the hero of the hour after dramatically saving a man who could have died from heart failure. Neil Gooder claims he was only doing his job when he turned his ambulance into a makeshift operating theatre.
10 days after his skills as a paramedic were tested to the full, Neil Gooder visited the man whose life he saved. Still weak after his ordeal, former gymnast Kevin Wood is still some way from a full recovery at Sheffield's Northern General Hospital. But he knows how much worse his fate could have been, but for Neil's timely intervention.
I could have died, and as I said, it's all down to Neil. I'm glad he was there and did everything he could, and from his training that he knew what to do.
Neil diagnosed that Kevin had suffered a collapsed lung, but recognised that the pressure inside his chest was so severe that his heart could have stopped. The journey to hospital would have taken too long. Inside his ambulance, he inserted a special needle to relieve the pressure.
It's great. I mean, he's only 21. He's all his life in front of him. And if I hadn't done what I did, he might not have been here today.
What makes Neil Gooder's achievement even more remarkable was that it was the first time he'd ever carried out the procedure.
Police are treating the death of a woman whose body was found near a Bradford car park as murder. The body was found by a passerby on a disused land off Thornton Street. Detectives say they think the woman was in her early 20s. Post-mortem examination is being carried out. A new luxury train aimed at the business community has been proposed to run across the Pennines. Grand Central Railways has plans for a high-speed route from Newcastle to Manchester via York, Leeds and Wakefield.
Grand Central Railways say this is the future of rail travel. Plush trains that can compete with a luxury car for comfort. So can luxury car users ever be persuaded onto a train?
The presentation is nice, but I think at the end of the day it boils down to timetables.
Yeah, I would if there was no hassle, yeah, definitely.
Whatever the outcome, it'll be many months yet before the first trains can run.
And our reporter Alan Whitehouse is with me in the studio. Alan, can you describe the typical passenger who's going to use these services?
I think that the person Grand Central Railways have in mind is a senior businessman, the sort of person you see whizzing along in the outside lane of the M62 or the A1, perhaps in a BMW or a Mercedes car. Someone who's got to get to meetings very often in the middle of cities. And the railway company is saying that all the research shows that a substantial number of businessmen would switch to trains from their cars if the trains were up to scratch. Now, right now, fewer than 3% of them make that decision. And Grand Central Railways are saying this tells you that the existing service isn't delivering what business people want. And that's what they want to do something about.
So these people spend an awful lot of money on their cars. You've mentioned BMWs, for example, there. Are they really going to want to stand on drafty railway platforms?
Well, that really, in many ways, is the $64,000 question. Now, Grand Central Railways say definitely yes. Other people have their doubts, it has to be said. But when I went out to talk to some business travellers earlier today, the reactions were really very positive, and you get the impression that a lot of these people are driving not really because they want to, because conditions out on the roads can be horrific these days, very overcrowded, very congested. They're driving because they have to, and they seem to think that, you know, the responses I was getting suggested that if you give them a service that they can rely on and that is very comfortable, a lot of them would make the switch, yeah.
Very briefly, are there examples of this being a success elsewhere?
Just one I can think of, the link from the centre of London out to Heathrow Airport, the Heathrow Express. It's very expensive, but business people use it because it's quick and convenient.
OK, Alan, thanks very much indeed. Well, on to sport now. Our three county cricket sides managed some play today. First to Canterbury, Kent against Yorkshire and Clive Eakin.
Michael Vaughan and Darren Lehman have led Yorkshire to a dominant position at the halfway point of this match. Vaughan batted with confidence and excellent timing in an innings of 71, and Lehman was as unrestrained as ever in scoring 68. Anthony McGrath with 29 and David Bias, a carefully accumulated 18 not out, played supporting roles as Yorkshire built a first innings lead of 66. They closed on 208 for 4.
At the racecourse ground, Derbyshire made 171 for 7 at the close against Middlesex. And over at Trent Bridge, Nottinghamshire have made 38 for 1, chasing Durham's 284. Visitors were out in force at the Harrogate Spring Flower Festival today. The current vogue for garden makeover programmes on television has given fresh impetus for this year's show. Gardeners were able to see creative ideas from Britain's top flowerbed designers. And finally, congratulations to our Harry Gratian. He was named BT Northern Broadcaster of the Year at a ceremony in York today. Well done, Harry. A look at the weather to end with. And showers will die away through the evening to give a clear, cold night, a minimum temperature of 3 Celsius. Tomorrow, dry and sunny in the morning, scattered light showers developing by the afternoon, a top temperature of 14 Celsius. That's it from the Look North team. Back now to Michael Burke for the main news again. From us all, good night.
And the main news again tonight. The government's planning to give every newborn baby up to £800 to be invested until they reach the age of 18. Tony Blair says the so-called baby bond will help reduce poverty and encourage saving. The Tories say it's an election bribe. Downing Street has denied changing the foot and mouth slaughter programme in order to save Phoenix the calf. Question Time is next on BBC One. The Newsnight is just starting over on BBC Two. From the 10 o'clock news, good night.
Have your say on the big news stories. Log on to BBC Online's Talking Point at bbc.co.uk/news.
Good evening. It looks like we're going to keep April showers for the rest of April. It certainly is living up to its reputation. And those April showers supposedly bring forth May flowers. However, we have a concern with frost over the next few nights. Temperatures locally down to freezing for Wales and Scotland tonight, a widespread ground frost, and then the frost will be prevalent for northern parts of Britain, as you can see, over the coming weekend. But otherwise it is a case of slow-moving showers, some locally quite heavy downpours, but some pleasant sunshine in between. Now, we did have some pleasant sunshine today between the showers, nearly 12 hours in Fishguard, but the showers, although less widespread than yesterday, were still quite potent with some thunderstorms. And look at what the cloud brought in this afternoon along southern parts of England, quite hefty rain, and that's now starting to migrate along the East Channel, which is where it will remain through the rest of the night as it clears from the west. The heaviest rain, the strongest winds more than likely through the Channel, northern France and the Channel Islands, and should have cleared from most parts except Kent, say, by the end of the night. Then it's quite quiet, high pressure's in charge, so the still conditions leading to quite a bit of mist and fog, I think, by morning. Just the hint of more cloud and rain coming into Northern Ireland, though, by that stage. So quite a wet end to the morning for Northern Ireland tomorrow. That rain then crosses into western parts of Scotland and then many parts of England and Wales through tomorrow afternoon and tomorrow evening with a freshening southerly wind. So a fine start for many tomorrow morning. The mist and fog should clear quite quickly, and the rain from Kent. But the rain will be marching in across Northern Ireland into western parts of Scotland through the afternoon, the western fringes of England and Wales, just 1 or 2 showers breaking out ahead of it, but for many parts of eastern Scotland, central and eastern England, eastern Wales, a lot of fine and dry weather until tomorrow evening. And I think by that stage, or at least compared with today, it will be much drier and brighter up in the northeast of England. A cool, damp day today, just 6 or 7 degrees with drizzle. Much brighter tomorrow, just 1 or 2 rogue showers breaking out across the Pennines. And 14 or 15 will feel quite pleasant, of course, in the sunshine, but with the strengthening wind and the rain further west, temperatures will be down on those of today, and that rain and fresh wind will still be in eastern areas to start Saturday. And it could hang on in the northeast of Scotland. Even once it clears, it's a case of sunshine and showers for many of us, some heavy downpours around, fairly brisk wind in the south even into Sunday. But some of those showers containing hail and thunder, a little pleasant sunshine between. But by Monday, there's a risk of more persistent rain into the south and east, but a little drier further north and west. Bye-bye.
Obviously, everybody was stunned when Alan Titchmarsh left ground force, but who would have imagined that Peter Mandelson would have done such a good job as his replacement?
Have I got news for you? Tomorrow at 9 on BBC One.
What happens when 17 ordinary people go back in time 2,500 years?
I don't feel safe anymore.
Could you cope? Surviving the Iron Age starts Thursday the 10th of May on BBC One.
Topical debate on BBC One now from Manchester. Question time with David Dimbleby.
Tonight on Question Time, the Cabinet Office and Dome Minister, Lord Faulkner, the shadow